When the moving truck rolled past the iron gates of Maple Crest Estates, I was already watching from the balcony of the clubhouse. The same clubhouse Keran once used as her personal throne. Back then, she'd stand right where I was standing now, clipboard in hand, policing hedge heights and mailbox colors like she was running a small, angry kingdom. Today, her name popped up on the security log as a returning resident, freshly released and clearly expecting things to be just as she left them. 5 years ago, I was just another homeowner she loved to fine. Grass too long, trash can visible for 6 minutes too many. Rules are rules, she'd say, smiling like she enjoyed the power. Then came the investigation. Missing HOA funds, forged signatures. It turned out the rules applied to everyone except her. Prison followed, fast and public. While she was gone, Maple Crest changed, slowly at first. One foreclosure turned into 2, then an estate sale. I didn't plan to buy half the neighborhood, it just happened. Good timing, quiet deals, and patience. By the time the dust settled, I owned the majority of the homes, the commercial strip at the entrance, and eventually the HOA itself. Keran's car stopped at the gate, confused. She leaned out, waving at the camera like it should recognize her. It didn't. The new system pinged my phone instead. I watched her argue with the intercom, her voice tinny but familiar, demanding access, demanding respect, demanding what she thought was still hers. I remembered the day she fined Mrs. Alvarez for having chalk drawings on her driveway. I remembered the meeting where she shut off my mic because she didn't like my questions. Those memories didn't make me angry anymore. They just made this moment feel earned. I tapped the intercom button. "Visitor access only," I said calmly. "State your business." There was a pause, then disbelief. "This is Karen Whitfield. I live here." I almost laughed, but I didn't. "Not anymore," I replied, "and you'll need approval to enter. New policies." Silence again. I imagined her scanning the gate, the sign with the updated HOA logo. My logo. She didn't know yet. She still thought power was a title you bullied your way into, not something built quietly over time. The gate stayed closed. The neighborhood behind it was peaceful, orderly, and finally free. Keran eventually got through the gate that afternoon, but not the way she expected. Visitor pass. Time limit. Her car crawled down streets she once ruled, past houses she'd fined into bitterness or chased into selling. She didn't recognize how many of those homes were now rentals freshly painted, identical landscaping, all managed by the same company. Mine. The first thing she did was exactly what I knew she would do. She called an HOA meeting. The request hit my inbox with the same tone she always used, formal, entitled, and dripping with the assumption that everyone else would fall in line. She cited bylaws she clearly hadn't read since before her sentencing, demanding an emergency session to restore order and address unauthorized changes. I approved the meeting within 5 minutes. The clubhouse filled up that evening, more people than I'd seen in years. Not because they missed Keran, but because they wanted to watch. Word travels fast in a neighborhood that had spent half a decade healing. Keran walked in wearing confidence like armor, heels clicking, chin raised. She paused when she saw me seated at the head of the table. That pause was everything. Her eyes flicked to the nameplate in front of me. President, Maple Crest HOA. She smiled tightly. "I assume there's been a clerical error." "No," I said calmly. "There's been an election. Several, actually." Murmurs rippled through the room. Keran turned slowly, scanning faces she once intimidated. No one avoided her eyes. No one looked afraid. Mrs. Alvarez nodded at me. A couple near the back smiled. Someone even gave a small, polite clap. Keran launched into a speech anyway, about standards, about tradition, about how things had fallen apart without her leadership. She complained about new paint colors, relaxed parking rules, and the community garden where the old "no personal modifications" sign used to be. When she finished, she folded her arms, satisfied. I waited a beat, then another. "Thank you," I said. "Now I'll respond." I explained the new policies: transparent finances, open meetings, no fines without review, no harassment disguised as enforcement. I showed charts, numbers, receipts, everything she never kept. Then I shared the part she truly didn't expect. Due to unpaid dues, legal judgments, and forfeiture during your incarceration, I said evenly, your former property was sold. It is now owned by Maple Crest Holdings. Her mouth opened, closed. That's impossible. I slid a folder across the table. You're welcome to review the documents. The room was silent except for the soft scrape of paper as she flipped through proof she couldn't argue with. For the first time, Keran had no rule to weaponize, no authority to hide behind. You don't get to run this place anymore, I said, not unkindly. You get to live by the same rules as everyone else. She stood abruptly, chair scraping loud against the floor. Her eyes burned with humiliation, not anger. Anger was easy. This was worse. She walked out without another word. And I knew this wasn't over. Keran didn't leave Maple Crest after that meeting. She stayed, temporarily, crashing with a distant cousin 2 streets over in a house I also owned, though she didn't know it yet. I let that fact sit quietly, the same way real leverage always does. Power doesn't need to announce itself. It just waits. Within days, the complaints started. Keran filed them the old way: long emails, legal-sounding language, carbon copies to anyone she thought might still fear her. She complained about parking violations that no longer existed, about lawn ornaments that were now allowed, about music from a weekend barbecue that had official permits and ended early. Each complaint landed in the system, time-stamped, logged, and reviewed by a committee, instead of disappearing into a shredder like they used to. And each one was denied, politely, professionally, with references attached. That drove her crazy. She tried a different angle next. She went door to door, warning residents that I was turning the neighborhood into a rental farm, that property values would collapse, that they were being tricked. What she didn't understand was that people had already seen the numbers. Values were up, crime was down, the pool was renovated, the HOA actually had a surplus. People listened, then they closed their doors. The final straw came when she tried to call a vote of no confidence. She stood up at the next monthly meeting, voice shaking but loud, accusing me of consolidation, corruption, and control. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. I let her speak. I always did. Transparency meant letting people hang themselves with their own words if they insisted. When she finished, I stood. Keran, I said evenly, you currently don't own property in Maple Crest. You're not a voting member. Her head snapped up. That's not true. I live here. You reside here, I corrected, as a guest, temporarily. She laughed, sharp and brittle. You don't get to decide that. I tapped the screen behind me. A lease agreement appeared. The address, the owner, Maple Crest Holdings. I do, I said, and so does the law. The room stayed quiet. Not shocked, just settled. This wasn't a reveal to them. It was confirmation. Keran looked around, desperate for support. She found none. No one cheered. No one mocked her either. They simply watched someone finally face the same system she once abused. She left the meeting early again, this time slower. That night, I authorized the final step I'd been holding back. Not revenge, not punishment, just closure. The lease wouldn't be renewed. Perfectly legal. Proper notice. Assistance offered. No drama. By morning, she'd received the email. By evening, she was gone. The neighborhood felt lighter, not triumphant, just calm. Because the real victory wasn't owning the streets or the houses. It was proving that power, when shared and accountable, doesn't need a Keran to enforce it. Keran left Maple Crest on a gray morning, the kind that feels like a pause rather than an ending. No moving truck, just a few suitcases and a ride share idling at the curb. I watched from my office window, not out of spite, but out of habit. Once, she watched everyone else like this. Now, no one was watching her. The neighborhood didn't celebrate her departure. There were no posts, no gossip threads, no victory laps. Instead, Something better happened. Nothing. Kids rode bikes without being shushed. A couple planted sunflowers in their front yard where a violation notice used to hang. Someone painted their door bright blue. It stayed blue. At the next HOA meeting, attendance dropped. Not because people stopped caring, but because they finally trusted the system to work without constant supervision. Committees ran themselves. Budgets were approved in minutes. Disagreements happened, but they ended in compromise instead of threats. I stepped down as president 3 months later. That surprised people more than anything else I'd done. I stayed on as a property owner, of course, and as an advisor when asked, but I handed the role to a retired teacher who believed rules existed to help people live together, not control one another. She was fair. She listened. She reminded everyone of time limits with a smile instead of a glare. Maple Crest didn't need an emperor. It never did. One afternoon, I found an old box while clearing out the HOA storage room. Inside were Karen's binders, years of handwritten notes, violation logs, color-coded tabs. Control, carefully archived. I flipped through a few pages, then recycled the lot, not to erase the past, but to make room for something better. I still own most of the neighborhood. That never changed. What changed was how little that fact mattered. Ownership turned out to be less about power and more about responsibility, making sure roofs didn't leak, rents stayed fair, and people felt secure where they lived. Months later, I heard Karen had moved again. New city, new association, new start, maybe. I hoped she'd learned something, but that part was no longer my concern. The gate at Maple Crest still stands, but it's rarely closed now. Visitors come and go. Residents wave each other through. The rules are posted clearly, enforced gently, and reviewed often. The neighborhood belongs to the people who live in it, and that was the one thing Karen never understood. Enjoying this HOA comeback story and the slow-burn justice that comes with it? Stick around. Subscribe for more neighborhood power shift stories, real consequences, and satisfying twists. If this one hit just right, give it a like and drop a comment below. What moment do you think shocked Karen the most? Losing the HOA, the house, or the control?